Hello and welcome back to the Old Street Labs podcast. I'm your host, Rob Woodhead, and this is the second episode of the one about AI. So with me, once again, is Rob Lynch.
Hello, hello.
And the wonderful Ben Burch.
Hi there.
So, last time we spoke about vibe coding and what that was and what that meant to all you guys out there. This time, I would like to bring a topic up about agents. So this year, 2026, has been named the year of the agent by various different people. The likes of Google have brought out Gemini Spark, Claude or Anthropic have brought out Claude CoWork, ChatGPT has agent mode, and there's obviously one of the things that sparked it all off, which is OpenClaw. It's everywhere, and everyone's talking about it. So we thought we would just delve into it a little bit so that we can get our heads around it a bit and see where it might be useful for businesses. So Rob, do you want to start us off and just kind of explain what an agent is?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the easiest ways to look at it is just to contrast what an agent is versus what a normal chatbot is. So everyone knows what a chatbot is, especially if you use ChatGPT. You ask a question, you get an answer. The main difference really with an agent is that it has access to what's called tools in the background. And tools sounds a bit vague, but essentially we're talking about it can access the internet, it can do things for you on a browser, but if in a corporate setting, it can also do access your own internal tools, so your own databases, your CRM software, ERP software, whatever it might be, and potentially interact directly with that. So I guess that's there's extensions to that. There are workflows that agents can be involved with, and so on. But essentially, it's this access to tools, its ability to do stuff, that's the difference.
Yeah, the piece I was thinking about was the difference between a guidebook and a travel agent. So the guidebook you can go to for information, you just get some information directly from it, but the agent actually goes and books your holiday, buys the bus ticket, buys the butlins, sorts all that out for you, basically. You can tell my holidays. Ben, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I think this, one way of thinking about it is just multi-step, so it can do more than one thing and then make a decision to the next one. So whatever the task might be, an agent can basically delegate or give out or sort of permission to do more than one thing at once. So not just, I have a question, I want an answer. It's more, I'm trying to get to this place, take me on the steps that get me there. And that can expand into much more complicated kind of stages, but in simple terms, it's not just ask a question, get an answer. It's sort of almost like define a destination and it will work towards that. And I think, conceptually or sort of as a way of thinking, maybe AI, I think of it a little bit like the sort of development of a human, and you go from, a child and you lots of questions, but not very much useful output. And as you go through education, you notionally get more useful output. And then you go into the work environment, and we're probably in that sort of bit beyond an intern now. We're into sort of treating AI like a sort of a sort of junior employee, maybe. So you can give them tasks, but you wouldn't give a junior employee a sort of a full strategy. You'd give them something a bit piecemeal. So it's like, here's a task, complete the task, come back when you've got there. And as time goes on, as we get more, as AI gets better, you can sort of give a bigger chunk. It's like, I need you to go off and do this whole thing, rather than just go and give me this micro task. And if we think back not that long, let's say 12 months, you couldn't really do much more than give it a question and get an answer, because it would sort of, you listen to all the sort of hallucinations or all the other sort of things that come up about AI. But now it's like you can give it a task and it can take a few steps. Now, Some people will say it can take many, many steps, and whether that's highly accurate or not is the sort of the proof point we're at. But it's very much that kind of sort of junior employee type way of thinking.
Are you able to predetermine the steps it will take? Can you say, right, I want you to do this, then this, then this? Or does it go off and kind of work its own way through whatever task you give it?
You can structure it, right? So it's about how you put these things together. So you can set kind of structures and rules, I suppose. One of the things that's actually different about this than perhaps other more technical developments is lots of the instructions are just normal. Okay, in classic IT, they've come up with like a format that sounds different, Markdown, but basically it's text instructions. So it's not code. It's not sort of written in some language you have to learn and such. It's basically text instructions to do things. And so you can have skills and you can have instructions and things. And it's like you act as this type of person and do this task, and you have these skills. And a skill might be, I don't know, to send an email or to do something. And so it's kind of it's super logical when you break it down. But that's kind of sort of broadly speaking how it works.
Just to add to that, I think there's a similarity actually between the agents and what we were talking about last time with vibe coding, in that the term has become a bit contorted compared to its original meaning. So the idea of an agent was that you could give it access to tools and then some instructions, and then it could use whatever tools it wanted to finish the job. The reality is that much more of what's going on in enterprise is just this structured workflow thing. So you just insert the AI in a specific point in a workflow where it can summarize or extract data or classify or route emails or whatever it does. The AI gets inserted at very specific points, but then agent sounds cooler than AI-powered workflow. So agent just sort of, I think it's destined to just encompass everything, even though it started off with that narrow meaning.
So that, I guess that's quite an interesting comparison, because there's a real difference between those two things, right, Rob? With like something which has basically a flywheel and just goes off and starts working on its own to figure out the problem, versus a built through or a workflow which is built out, and one of the spokes in the wheel of that workflow is an AI that's asked to do a specific function.
Yeah, and the reality is it's a lot safer, and probably the low-hanging fruit is in that more boring category where it's just it's just inserted in a process. Whereas I don't know that there are that. I mean, there's things like research where if you do have a really meaty research task, then it's pretty useful for the AI to be able to access different APIs to get different data, for example. And if you do set it up in a way that it can do that at will, if it's good enough, then it can make use of different tools as it so chooses. But I think that the reality is that most of where the value is, at least now in 2026, is still pretty, as Ben says, it's junior employee level. It's I don't want to use the word boring too much because it's still pretty cool, but it's just in those workflows.
Have you actually seen anything created that is working and is actually pretty useful?
Me still? Yeah. I think we've been working on agents, or something that you would call an agent, since 2023, at least, to the beginning of 2023, which we didn't really even call it an agent at the time, but it's still a workflow that we built for a client, which is classifying weighty academic documents and extracting meaningful data and interpreting it as part of a workflow. So I think that that made use of GPT 3.5, I think, when in the initial instance, and that was still pretty useful then. So it's things like that where you've got a defined workflow that utilizes either a heck of a lot of human time or what AI is really good at, so reading and understanding documents very fast. That's where it can really add a lot of value.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I find the kind of CoWork experience, so Claude CoWork, that experience is really powerful. Like there is no getting away from that capability just on your desktop. The ability to kind of even almost not really, you don't really have to configure it. I say configure it like you're creating multi-step processes without really doing anything, any kind of crazy stuff. And that ability to go from like one step or one question through to a finished document, for example, is pretty powerful. And that is that you can expand that. And if you set up your environment you set up your folders and stuff with in a reasonably structured way, you can actually generate a huge amount of output in a relatively short space of time. I think the key bit here is where it really comes into its own is wherever anything is repeatable. So that's the key here, is because if you repeat it, it means it's something that can be defined in some form. It might simply be, when this email arrives, I want you to save it here and remove the attachment and put it in a accounting system, for example. As soon as you've done that once, it's done, and that's it. That's an agent doing that task. And I think we've talked about these tools or these skills, as the skills get better, more things fall into that repeatable bracket. Yeah. So as the skills get better, and if you go online and look at, like, I don't know, Claude skills or there are hundreds of thousands of these. It's not like someone has come up with a skill to do something. It's like there are hundreds of thousands of them, probably millions, of skills that people have taken the time to write, or probably used AI to write, to perform a function. Now, lots of it is in my job, I suppose, is not things that I class as useful, because I don't have to sit there doing those kinds of tasks. But there are clearly vast swathes where that sort of research is a classic, great example. Repeatedly going out on a daily basis or weekly basis and trawling the internet for a bunch of information and seeing what's changed. That's a very agentic, whatever you want to call, process, and now is very easy to repeat, to make repeatable.
So that kind of sits in your analogy of we've progressed from the intern to the junior colleague, and it's like teaching a man to fish versus fishing yourself. Like, if you teach that junior, I'm using terrible analogies here, but you teach that junior person in your team how to do the task once. It takes longer to do it that particular time, but then it's repeatable. You can take your hands off it, and it's it's delegation to that person.
Yeah,
I guess.
And let's just and that has happened in 3 or 4 months.
Mm.
So from your good graduates to your junior employee has been a couple of months. It's not been 3 years of training in the office. It's happened in a couple of months, and now everything's repeatable. The next step will happen in 2 or 3 months, and it won't be a junior employee. It will be, if we talk about OpenClaw or some of these other kind of more orchestration type things, there's your management structure, right? Once you've got your management structure, and there are loads of people doing this, whether they're actually doing it or just talking about doing it, but they have these orchestrations of agents running agents. Well, what does a company look like? It's a person managing people, and you extend that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add to that, what I think is going to be really interesting is where this goes from a what the humans do perspective, because I think if you're managing junior employees, um, I mean that's one sort of discipline that you have to learn in HR and stuff. But really, when it comes to agents, you don't. I like Ben's analogies about like looking at them growing through their career, but fundamentally, I think it's a bit dangerous to anthropomorphize these too much. They're still tools. They're still bits of code. And really, the relationship that you want with them, or that I want, I think, is just to see. I want a cockpit where I can see these are my agents. This is what they've been doing. If it's in customer service, I can drill down into each agent and see what replies it's given. If there's any negative feedback from a customer, I want to drill down into that and see why it said what it said. I want to see confidence intervals, so how confident was it in its answers and stuff. And I think that when things progress to more orchestration, that relationship between the real human management team and the agentic part of the business, that relationship's going to have to change as well. Because I'm kind of thinking about this like live, so forgive me if I go a bit off piece, but it seems to me that if you do have that like multiple orchestrators, all with multiple agents underneath them, you're going to want to have a relationship almost with those orchestrators, understand why they're doing what they're doing. Just be able to drill down into individual decisions and see how they've gone, and to the extent that they're interacting with humans, what are those touch points? How did is there a sort of rating system where the humans can say it's been the interaction's been good or bad? So there's a weird. I'm kind of going into future territory now, but I think we're entering a strange place where the relationship between us humans and the agentic side of the business is going to, it's going to be a focus, I suppose, in the next year or so.
I guess to bring it, just to make sure we're staying in the present for a minute rather than gazing too far in the future, and future conversations I'm sure between us will be about orchestration. But like where we are now, what are you suggesting to people and how to do it, right? What are you suggesting to a small business who wants to, should they be experimenting? Should they be implementing something? Should they be getting, 20, everyone should have a Claude CoWork, license? How should people go about it? And I guess the secondary point to that is, and I guess this talks to Rob's point, where do you make sure the human has the reins still? Where do you make sure that this can't go?
Yeah, I think we touched on two things we talked about. One was OpenClaw, which is, so OpenClaw is I guess a much more free-form agent or process. That's definitely the kind of realm of, okay, if you go on LinkedIn, you believe everyone is running OpenClaw and that they've got their own little army of OpenClaws. But that's a much more kind of, I would say, much more developer-centric type approach. It's a little bit more involved. It's a little bit more, you've got to definitely understand the implications of what you're doing. It's a lot more open, quite literally open from a kind of security perspective. And so you've got to know what you're doing. And so I wouldn't recommend, but I don't advise, I don't tell people, oh yeah, just go and have a crack at that and see how you get on. I have it, but I'm quite controlled about what I do with it rather than think, because it's something to explore. Claude Code, on the other hand, Claude CoWork, on the other hand, I think is a pretty good place to start, right? It's on your desktop. It gives you a taster of that sort of slight set and forget. Like, I have a task, press the button, maybe there's some follow-up questions, and then you let it get on with it. It's very much something you can see. yeah, there are plenty of controls, and you do get prompted about permissions a lot and what you want to do and stuff. But as a way of working, it's certainly a good way in. It's a fairly user-friendly way into like understand the basic concept of going from sort of step 1 to step 10 in one go, rather than a sort of more chatbot or chat GPT type interface where you're just ask a question, get an answer, build up to a process. So I think the CoWork experience is a pretty good insight. It actually takes away a lot of the, it sort of removes some of the obscurity, right? The difference is you ask a question, you get an output rather than a conversation. Well, that's agents, right? That's what's happening under the hood. If you look at it and you look at the UI, it'll tell you all the skills it's used, but you don't need to know that. You just need to know that you asked a question, you set about a task and you got an output. That, to me, in this kind of world of trying to kind of get a foot in the door and understand stuff, is a pretty good place to start.
Yeah. It is interesting though, and I mean, taking a step back, that it's doing stuff which you said just then, Ben. You don't have to know what's going on under the hood, and so are we going to get to a place where a lot of things are kind of homogenous because it's kind of doing the same thing for everybody? Everyone's going to ask a similar-ish question. It's going to do a similar type process. Yeah. I'm already seeing it. You already see it on things which are created with some of these vibe code tools, right? Which in some ways are agents in a way, because you're saying I want a dashboard for my whatever tool, and they're all coming out looking incredibly similar. Do you think that's where we're going, or do you think there's an element of being able to put a bit more humanity or your personality or humanness into it with that orchestrator, because you'll be able to give it I can talk to it for 20 minutes and it can understand who I am a bit more. I mean, I certainly tried to do that with my some of the tools I've created. I don't know whether they're that different to anybody else's, to be honest.
I think, it's changing very rapidly. If we look at, say, take like e-commerce. So Shopify, if you log into Shopify now and you look at the back of a thing, back end, and it'll show you where it has agentic shopping. It has where agents have found your products. Now, I don't know how many people are shopping via agents. Probably not that many, right? But it's starting to happen. So if you think about that for a second, you have agents. Someone out there is searching via whatever to find a product. So there's still a human making the request, I guess, right? But it's a bunch of people doing sort of market research. But anyway, you've got an agent making a request to Shopify. You then have tools of Shopify that can optimize pages, ad campaigns, and all the rest of it, which can be agentic, which are agents. It's not very long at all before those things just talk to each other. So the transaction layer, this sort of low-level thinking of like, I want this, where is it, when can I get it by, that kind of transaction, if you want to call it, we're not involved in that. We don't need to be. So we have to find we will find uses for ourselves. We will exist and we will do stuff, but we'll have to be on very much the creative side, very much like you said, Rob, the kind of human side, the relationship and stuff. And so you've seen this online in e-commerce. There's endless, almost like AI generated product out there. And then you've got real product with a real person with a real brand behind it. They're at the moment kind of competing on a level playing field. I don't think they will, because people want the human. They want the human element behind it. But some of that transaction stuff, some of that interaction will disappear, because this tool will talk to this tool and there'll be agents doing stuff that will that will disappear. Or it will disappear as a value proposition, because do I need someone who can optimize my advert when this tool can optimize it 1 million times? Well, if you're doing something very creative, yeah, you need the human to come up with something really creative. If you're selling a battery, something very kind of commoditized, there's nothing, you can't add value there. So it's a real divergence.
I agree. I think it really speaks to the homogeneity point, because Shopify is a good example. E-commerce generally is a good example where you can see a world where now people are trying to optimize their pages for LLMs, for humans to find their pages via ChatGPT or Claude. But increasingly, the pages are, whether it's e-commerce or you can imagine other sectors as well, that are trying to optimize their pages for not for humans finding them via LLMs, but for agents finding them, full stop, right? So you can kind of see, well, what's the point in having beautiful imagery, or trying to appeal to humans in a world where actually what you need to do is appeal to agents instead. I mean, probably a long way off, right?
Yeah, you see it with like imagery. You see it with images where they put text in the image to make sure that when an LLM is reading or interpreting the image, they get the text off it as another reinforcing point about trying to work out what the image is. I mean, the direction of travel is unstoppable. It's just a question of trying to navigate where the bits of value, I suppose, will be left behind. Where will humans want to exist and participate, and what will just eradicate? It will still happen. Like, the transactions will still happen, but where does the value exist, and where's the opportunity for us to spend our days? That'll be the bit that has a greater value.
We've jumped into,
in my opinion, like that's the kind of.
We've got back into
innovate.
I mean, it's interesting. I was at a networking event last night, and one of the chaps I was speaking to was talking about grant writing, and grant writing is, it's paint by numbers almost, like fill in the blanks. And he's like, we now have an agent which does this for us, and we've now become very successful with writing grants or grant applications. And I was kind of debating with him, well, surely at some point the other side becomes just an AI reader, right? Because you're having an advantage at the moment because not everyone's doing what you're doing. I'm sure they're headed that way. On the other side, he's like, no, these people, it's always going to be a human reading it. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure at some point they're going to realize that there's a much more efficient way to assess 500 applications for a grant. But that's interesting as well, because CVs,
well,
exactly.
It's happened in HR, hasn't it? It's happened in employment, right? So you've had for a long time the sort of screeners, and now they're putting all the applicants, their interviews are AI or whatever, are online and are interpreted by AI. That's the first gate. I mean, so no area will be untouched. It's just a question of which element will not get touched. And I think we've seen it with, we go back to the e-commerce example, there is a rather large retailer out there that provides everything, right? You can get everything on it next day. Now, there are still loads of other retailers out there, but often you can just, you don't have to create an account, and it probably ends up coming to the same place.
You're not mentioning them.
We're not the BBC. We're going to be on the BBC soon.
You can say them by name.
I don't know why. No,
do they begin with A?
Not the name.
Well, but I suppose, and they nearly end in Z. Yeah, they no, but actually, it's a good point. A reference point, which is something that Jeff Bezos, I think he said, or if he didn't, he's going to get the credit for it, was don't think about what's going to change, think about what's not going to change. Yeah. So his point with Amazon was like, well, people will always want a product selection. They will always, and they're not going to want slower delivery. They're going to want faster delivery. So it's like, rather than trying to focus, one of the challenges with AI and this like rapid evolution is like all these things are changing. And I don't know the answer to this, so it's not a great point, but like try and drill down into the bit that won't change. Well, I think we've kind of touched on it, like the human element. Like, so The bits that will change are all these automations and stuff. The bits that won't change is that we don't know what's around the corner, and so there'll always be an unknown that has to be predicted and all the rest of it. So agents are going to be very good at the bit that doesn't change. Sorry, the bit that doesn't change, that's reproducible, that's like over and over again. But the human part is the bit that we'll have to always be thinking like, what's next? And so I think from this conversation, although we've definitely gone off topic, the agent bit is focusing on in your business. It's like what tasks are done over and over again, whether we think of that as a sort of a workflow, which is just a workflow really is just a bit more of a methodical step to that process of like or a step with gates, like I do this, I check that, I do this, I check that. An agent approach is it's just a bit more compressed and streamlined, I suppose, is another way of thinking about it. So anywhere in the business where you have a repeating set of tasks, whether that's, invoices coming in, being approved, being paid, being whatever, there's endless areas where things are repeated. That's the area for agents. Working out what to do with the other bits is definitely not the area for agents. And that's somehow in that is the kind of is the split.
Yeah, I mean, I want to ask one last question, but to make a point on that, I think there's also the requirement of businesses to think about the Jeff Bezos point, which is just looking at ways to make your business more efficient using agents is not going to be the way that you'll win. You also have to think about, how do I change my business so that I can make these agents work the best it possibly can be? Because what is the essence of my business? What am I trying to achieve? And therefore, what can I change? It's not just about making small efficiencies here and there. It's actually, maybe it's not making one workflow more efficient, but it's changing that workflow entirely, so that you're doing your goal, you're achieving your goal more easily.
I'd agree with I'd agree with both of you, but I'd add one more thing, which is just the side that always gets left out because it's slightly harder to define. But there's sort of automation, and as you say, a slightly larger version of automation, so automating entire business processes. But then augmentation, so that is treating, it's more along the, research is one area which I think is sort of squarely in this domain, but just putting the tools in the hands of management, especially senior people, to make them really, really effective at what they do. So exactly the right information at their fingertips, that's been gleaned from the internet, it's been gleaned from their team, it's been gleaned from the company databases, that if you can augment people so that they can do their jobs really well, and when the CEO asks a senior manager a question, they've got all the information to be able to do what they do best and distill that and interpret that and present it in the way they want, instead of having to ask a full team of juniors, then that becomes immensely valuable. So yeah, don't forget the augmentation side.
Great. Last question then, and I asked this in the vibe coding podcast we did before. Is this going to eat our lunch? Are we going to be subsumed by this? I think we came to the conclusion that vibe coding wasn't going to. It was just going to change the way we would do things. Is agentic and orchestration of agents, is that going to be taking over? I mean, it's pretty scary stuff, really.
It's a bit of a. I'm tempted to just say yes and just leave it at that. No, I think it's probably the boring answer, which is that it's not going to. It's just going to change what we do, and it has already changed what we do. The idea is that we hopefully are pretty good at understanding businesses, understanding what their needs are and what their requirements from a commercial and a technical perspective are, and where they're coming from, so what state their data is in, and so on, and coming up with a solution for them. And whereas 4 years ago that might have been we might have had one or two tools in the toolkit, mobile apps and web apps. Now we have more. So vibe coding means that we can make the tools cheaper and easier. Or I should say AI native coding. And agents is just another tool where we can say, well, we don't actually need to build you an interface. We can build you a chatbot, maybe with a little bit of an interface, but it's largely the agent in the background that's doing the work instead. So actually, I think it's quite exciting if you're sitting in our shoes. Don't know what you think, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, like all these things present a change and a shift. I think the point is, at the moment, those opportunities seem to be released on a weekly basis, and they're pretty seismic changes and shifts. I think one of the things that they definitely do is that causes uncertainty, because it's like, well, what next? What's coming around? What's the next release or the next update? There's a huge lag, right? So we're using these tools. Some people are using these tools, but the vast majority are not. So there's a sort of massive number of people who are just not even exposed to this stuff. Will it change it'll definitely change what we do. I think the big thing still, back to that analogy of the kind of more junior employee, like some of those tasks that you might give someone to kind of cut the teeth on, or whatever you want to call it, I don't think will be given to people anymore. Now that presents a different challenge, which is like, how do those people then learn and get up the kind of knowledge, sort of the experience ladder? But I think that's what we're seeing, is that those tasks will be removed because you could just do them directly. So I think there's a phase now, which is probably, I say, experienced people or sort of more senior people probably are going to get supercharged with these sort of toolkits, because they suddenly have access to effectively their vast sort of teams of virtual people. Sort of pushing the analogy a bit, but I think there's an acceleration there. I don't know how that pans out long term, but in the short term, I think that's an opportunity for people who can adapt it. I do think, as Rob says, people who can then leverage these tools will get this advantage, and they'll be able to do more in less time. Okay, how long that lasts before that sort of that wave gets automated as well, I don't know, but it's definitely an opportunity to kind of accelerate. And yeah, I think it's definitely an exciting area. It doesn't solve the problem immediately. Like, you don't just turn on OpenClaw and find that all your, I use it with like a task management. I've like built a task management thing. It doesn't do the tasks, right? It's not like solved all my to-do lists. But as I come up with stuff that happens more frequently, that task I don't do again. So it's quite an iterative process, but it's definitely a move forward. Sometimes technology is just a sort of different way of solving the same problem. This definitely isn't. There is a leap happening.
Yeah, I think just one thing to add to that. Out. Sorry, Rob. But just an observation that I made. Often I think you can kind of, it says a lot about the trends to look at the kind of the business jargon that starts being used. And a word that I've noticed has really been used a lot over the last year or maybe year and a half is just this notion of table stakes. So something happens and then everyone gets excited about it and only a few people using it, and then it becomes table stakes. Then it's all of a sudden everyone's using it, and that's tables, and then there's the next thing. So yeah, it's sort of illustrative of the pace at which things are moving, and just soon, very soon, you get excited about things one week, and then you just have to put it in your toolkit, almost forget about it, and then move on to the next one at such a pace, and it's mildly terrifying. But hey, here we are.
It's got to hold on to that roller coaster. Right, gents, that's fantastic. I think we'll end it there. It's an exciting time for sure. So hopefully we'll meet again in a couple of weeks and we'll chat about something else. But for now, thank you very much for being on, and we'll speak again soon.
Thanks, guys.